Hey everyone, so I'm going to go off on a limb here and talk about some issues I care about in regards to art and representation. So in this vlog, I'm going to start off by talking about cultural representation. For those of you who are not too familiar with this channel, we do a lot of various activities, such as art mashups and time-lapse videos and random skits and other various vlogs. But today I want to talk about cultural representation and what that means to me and what's the current state of affairs in regards to representing certain minority cultures, specifically in the gaming industry. For those of you who don't know, there was a game that came out from Indonesia called DreadOut. And DreadOut is basically a horror survival game where you play as an Indonesian schoolgirl, and the objective of this game all throughout is to take snapshots of various ghosts. And these ghosts are based on Indonesian folklore and supernatural stories. So it's kind of like Fatal Frame. For those of you who are not familiar, Fatal Frame was a short-lived Japanese gaming franchise where you have to take pictures of ghosts, and it kind of pioneered the horror survival in the Japanese gaming market, where it's pretty much one of its kind. You don't see a whole lot of other gaming series like that. The idea of capturing images of spirits as opposed to combating them. Or I guess that's also a form of combat. But in anywho, in DreadOut, you play as this Indonesian schoolgirl, and the plot revolves around lifting a curse, and that involves taking pictures of ghosts. Now, unlike Fatal Frame, where you have to use a standard camera obscura, like in the olden times, in this game, you use a smartphone. So it's pretty current, kind of plays onto this modern idea of current technology and what it would be like if you had to deal with the supernatural in the real world. And so what I love about this game is that they really capture the essence, sort of what it's like to be in an Indonesian town. So a lot of the stages are not always dark and taking place at night. You also get to explore an Indonesian town during the day. So there's a lot of cultural elements that I think the mainstream audience don't get to really see unless you've been to Indonesia or keep up with travel channels on YouTube or something. And so in regards to cultural representation, I think it's important to recognize that this is a game that, as far as I know, it's the first of its kind to be put out in the gaming market. There's no other game like it before. So I would say that DreadOut, there's actually two of them. The first one came out in around 2013. It wasn't really that well received, but the sequel, DreadOut 2, is the one that a lot of indie gamers like and talk about and review on YouTube. And that came out, I believe, in 2019, if my memory is correct. I'm not sure. And it's been developed by a studio known as Digital Happiness. I believe it's localized in Indonesia. And this game, I'd say, is quite interesting because apart from showcasing the wonderful graphics, in my opinion, it also plays into Indonesian culture where you get to collect different ghosts and compile an encyclopedia. So there's also a textual aspect to the game where you can always look up the different ghosts you collect, and there's a biography for each one. There's also a mini game where you have to feed a hungry ghost by collecting the right coffee ingredients. So it's also wonderful in this game is it also showcases different Indonesian coffee brands. So there's also that aspect to the game that I think is really wonderful. But I want to get a little more serious on this topic and talk about what cultural representation means for this game and the people who made this game. What's important in representing a culture, there's a man by the name of Stuart Hall, a Jamaican British activist, essayist, who talks about media representation specifically, but also talks about how culture is being portrayed in the media. And according to his theory, it's not so much about the accuracy or authenticity per se, but the meaning that's being given and the narrative behind what's being represented. Because you could spend a whole lifetime trying to be as 100% authentic on something, but but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would fly well for everybody in that given culture. For instance, in America, we often think the image of like a white skin, blue-eyed, blonde hair person, often male, often well-privileged, but that's not all of America. It's really based on the experience and, you know, what particular experience you have, where you grew up. There's many different regions in a given race and country. So in this case, for DreadOut, it's not so much how authentic it feels. There's certainly that when I saw the game and watched people play it, but it's also what it means, right? So for the folklore aspect, there's this narrative given that requires someone to write the script for the game. So it's being developed by Indonesians and not by a big developing company such as Microsoft or Square Enix or Activision. It's an independent studio that just happened to be on the platform of Microsoft. But what's really important in representing a culture, in giving its proper meaning, is whose lens is it being told through? Is it being told through a big corporation versus Indonesians presenting their own culture to the world? You know, it's not like when a particular movie is trying to depict a certain culture or history through the Western lens or through the lens of another country. It's being presented by that country. So that's the difference. What makes DreadOut special. When we talk about what it means of how a certain culture is presented, it's really important to see whose lens is it being told through. And it's not so much about how authentic it feels, but what it means for the people, in this case, Indonesians and people who are non-Indonesian but are curious how this game presents Indonesian culture. This is really important to me because this isn't something that's often talked about, and I've been planning to talk about this at great length, but for the sake of this video and this channel, I just wanted to give like a brief overview of what cultural representation is, what it means, and what can we do to amplify these marginalized voices, especially in the West, where it's often American, Canadian, or a Japanese production in the gaming world. So we also do have some other up-and-coming Chinese games that's being put into the mainstream market. But for me, as a Filipino American who is truly passionate about my own heritage, I'm just happy that at least within the Southeast Asian territory of the world, we have something like DreadOut that's being presented in the gaming world. And I'm very excited to see where this is going to lead into gaming and arts. Not to mention the artwork, I think, is quite phenomenal. I hope that was informative and made sense. And let me know your thoughts about this. I plan to do more series of things related to arts and representation. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you around next time.